Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I've got some breaking news for you as the Jaguars have come to a 4-year extension with Foye Oluokun, their star linebacker. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about what this means for the linebacker position. Maybe talking about some of the previous decisions made by this regime, what they may have done right, what they may have done wrong, and then what's it going to do for the salary cap for this year and beyond. So that's what we're going to discuss. And to jump into this, just to start it off, I want to explain what a 4-year extension means. When does this take place? Because I think that's something that's really easy to confuse. So, going back to when he signed with Jacksonville, which was back in 2022, he's been here 2 years. He signed a 3-year deal. That third year was not guaranteed. So what has happened, effectively, is that Oluokun has played out 2 years of that deal, and that deal has been replaced. So get rid of it. It's taken care of. It's in the past. So effectively what that ended up being was a 2-year, $30 million deal. Now, starting this year, Oluokun will begin this 4-year deal. So he will be here if he plays out the whole deal from 2024 through 2027. Now, he will be earning significantly less on this deal as well. I think that's important to note. So on the last deal, $15 million a year is the cap hit we're looking at effectively, or the average pay. Let's call it that. That's a better way of describing it. On this new deal, he is instead earning $11.25 million a year. So this is exactly a 25% pay cut for this season and beyond. So what has effectively happened is the Jaguars have extended Oluokun while agreeing to a pay cut. And this is great for the team, obviously, because you have the cap going up, you got more money to spend, and you're able to get back one of your best defensive players, one of the biggest leaders on this team, for a deal that is significantly cheaper. And I want you to keep in mind, whether or not you like Oluokun, because I know some people actually don't, which is a little shocking to me, but people have their opinions, right? Whether or not you like him, he has been an ascending player his entire time with the Jaguars. He has gotten better every single year. So, looking at it in a vacuum, just talking about him as a player, what they're paying him, what they were, is he better now than what he was under that contract? It's a win. I mean, I can't describe it any other way for the organization when we're just talking about him. But where this gets to be questionable, and I will say this before I get into that, I would make this decision as well in a heartbeat. The other players at that position are not changing my mind right now, because the only one that I think is a legitimately good starter is your other starter. So it's not going to impact anything with Oluokun. So I want to get that out of the way. But the clear issue with this, and what is really going to be as clear as day at this point, Chad Muma is going to be considered a miss by this organization, if he was not already. And for a lot of people, he has been since the day he was picked. And it makes sense to say that, because whether or not he's a good player, the role for him, or let's say the road for him to be able to start, has basically been impossible at this point. If he was to start for the Jaguars, he would effectively have to supplant their first-round pick from that year, or have beat out a player they paid $15 million a year. Because Jacksonville made this many investments at this position, when they have a system that almost all the time, even under the previous defensive coordinator and the new one coming in, will have 2 linebackers on the field. Not talking about outside linebackers, but your inside linebackers, your normal linebacker, right? Not pass rushers necessarily. There's 2 of those guys on the field most plays, and that is most plays by far. You see here just something I read from John Shipley earlier today. Shout out to him. He was talking about how last year for the Atlanta Falcons, which is the team that Ryan Nielsen comes from, they played 56 snaps in a 4-3 formation. And so what I mean by that, and what the impact of that is, the only way that Chad Muma is making it onto the field is if he's replacing Oluokun, or he's replacing Lloyd, And the other option is if they're running like a 4-3 scheme. And so we've talked a little bit about how it is going to be a 4-3, but I want to clarify what we really mean by that and say that some of that talk is wrong. What this really is going to be most likely for the vast majority of snaps is a 4-2-5 defense. So usually the way I've thought about it before is that everything's a 3-4 or a 4-3. And this is incorrect, but I just want to explain to you guys where my thinking has been on this. So when we think about it, it's usually based around what does the defensive line look like. That's usually what I'm getting at. So in a 3-4, you have 3 guys on the defensive line, and you've also got 2 stand-up pass rushers on the outside. Gives you more variability in what you can do because those guys can rush the passer or they're able to drop in coverage. So that's what your 3-4 looks like. But you have 2 linebackers in that formation because 2 of the 4 in 3-4 is your linebackers, and the other 2 are the outside linebackers, which are not, Muma, Lloyd, and Oluokun. Now, in a 4-3, you have 3 linebackers in that formation because you have your 4 defensive linemen. Those 2 outside linebackers are basically playing defensive end in that formation. And then you've got 3 linebackers behind, 4 players in the safety, 2 of them being cornerback, 2 of them being safety. So what you end up having when you run a 4-2-5 instead is you have the 4 defensive linemen, then it's 2 linebackers, a slot cornerback, 2 outside cornerbacks, and 2 safeties. This is what the Jaguars are going to be running most of the time, from what we understand right now. So what that means is that Muma's going to have something like 56 snaps, 5% of the defensive snaps, where he's on the field as the 3rd guy. The rest of his playing time is going to come from injuries, or it's going to come from one of those players taking a break, when you need rest. So, point is, the ability of Muma to have an impact as a 3rd round pick is essentially as limited as it gets. And you can say that maybe looking at these 3 players separately, that they are good football players. Maybe you believe that Muma is going to be a good starter if he gets the chance. And that's fine. I have no problem with that because I think it is a possibility. We have not given him the chance here in Jacksonville to do it. That's pretty clear. You have a 1st round pick there, and you got a guy you were paying $15 million a year before. You're still paying him way too much to sit on the bench. So because of that, you're in this situation where Muma cannot do anything. He's not going to get the starting time. And even if you have 3 really good players, it doesn't mean anything. Because while you picked a good player potentially, in the best case scenario, there's no route for that player to be an impact player. So, now we get in this situation where you're thinking, well, we need a backup, right? And I've talked about Ventrell Miller a lot on special teams before, our 4th linebacker, effectively. Because for Ventrell Miller, the first thing that was said about him when they drafted him was all about special teams. They talked about it a ton at their press conference. And that had me a little concerned. But I do think that if he gets the chance to be the rotational guy, that they'll give it to him. And so now, I look at it like this. You have your starting linebacker, your best guy, locked up for 4 years if you want him that long. He's at least here for 2. Devin Lloyd is at least here for 2, probably 3 if you accept the 5th-year option, which I think they probably will and probably should by that point. Got a whole nother year, but that's the trajectory we're going on. Then you got Ventrell Miller, who is on his 4-year rookie deal, and he's had 1 year on this team. So, because of that, I can look at that position and say, well, we've got our 2 starters, we've got our backup, and these guys are locked up for 3 years at least, as long as we want them. So what's the point of having Chad Muma on the team? And so I don't know what's going to happen necessarily, but I do think that the Jaguars should definitely explore a trade with Chad Muma going to another team. Of course, that's contingent on what would you get in return. Because if you're talking about, middle of the 6th round pick, are you going to do better with that, than having like a good backup for a while? You want to get a pick where you feel like you can maybe take a shot on someone who can be here longer and have just as much of an impact, if not more. So once you get into that range of like 6th round, I don't know if you really have that as much. So that's the issue that you run into if you're trading him for basically little to nothing. So you got to get something out of the deal. But I do think that Muma should be a player that the Jaguars move on from at this point, because I do think he has the ability to start in the NFL. And clearly with Jacksonville, the only way he's going to be able to start is something going wrong for the team, or one of the rare occasions where they're running a 4-3. So that's the major issue. Now, as far as how this impacts the salary cap, this is where we're at before. You have about $12 million in cap space this year, and next year, and this is a low estimate of the overall salary cap, I'm hearing it's going to be around $273 million. Of course, that can change a lot. You also got your cap rollover as well, but just right now, about $84 million. So you look at how this changes with a projected contract extension. I want you to keep in mind these numbers are not going to be perfect. This is an estimate. It will be close. It will not be perfect. You go from a cap hit of almost $22 million to probably around 10.5. Could be even smaller than this. So now with Oluokun, you're looking at being around almost $24 million in cap space, which is about $11 million more that you have. And then next year, you lose about $8 million. So overall, keeping him around for an extra year here, because of how you're structuring the cap, you actually have more money in these 2 years to spend, and you have him locked up for the future. Now, of course, the argument that you got to keep in mind is, well, your average per year is what matters, because that's how much you're actually paying him. You can move that money wherever you want to an extent, of course. Then you go to 2026, $16 million. $16 million. And then they'll probably have void years down here where they'll push more money down the road. But effectively, these 2 years, the Jaguars are in a better cap situation, and they have Foye Oluokun. So for the game they're playing, with pushing money down the road, they're playing it really well. So I like this move. Just to talk about it, I'm a huge fan of it. I do like what they did. All the talk about Chad Muma, I understand that, and I have my opinions on it. I have to separate that from this, because that's a different issue. That's an issue of how you're drafting. As far as Foye Oluokun, it's a great player that they acquired. And they acquired him before they drafted either of the other starters or backups at that position. The only one that would be an exception is Shaquille Quarterman. He's not on the roster right now, as far as I know. So, ultimately, I like the move a lot. And I like how this has worked out for Jacksonville. You're getting a player who's ascending. You're getting him on a cheaper deal. And you got him for 4 more years. It's a big deal for the team. But, of course, the downside of that, it's related. It's not factored into my grade on Oluokun. But I'm very frustrated with spending an early 3rd round pick on a player that you never gave the ability to see the field. That's a major issue for the organization. So 2 sides to that coin. But that's what I've got for you guys today. We'll have the mock draft up here in, actually, from my time right now, an hour and a half. It's probably up for most of you watching this. You can check that out. It's me and Dustin Mosier from With the First Pick going through the first round, talking about where players are probably going to go. Talking about our own teams as well. So we got some good insight on Jacksonville, get some good insight on some other teams as well, getting an idea of who's going to be there for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So definitely go check that out. It's going to premiere at 3 o'clock Eastern today, Friday, March 29th. So it's a good one to watch. But that's all I've got for you here. I appreciate y'all watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.